started to think about just historically all of the different empires, that have existed prior to ours and how they each had their fall.
Mhm.
And it feels like, I think collectively, whether you're a person who is religious or spiritual or, none of the above, just existing, in the society that we have co-created, it feels like
This is
things
it.
coming to an end.
Yeah.
Like it just feels like, late stage capitalism is definitely upon us. And um just the feeling that like people are really struggling to survive in ways that, I mean,
Not sustainable.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um and so with Trump being reelected into office, it just, it's just like it's time for us to kind of think about like, or not even just now, we've always been thinking about it, but to just kind of talk about what does it mean when an empire falls?
Yeah.
Why does that happen? How did we get here? And where are we headed? Um,
Yeah.
Many of us, especially if you're listening to this podcast, probably
Have
have some
thoughts about that.
understanding or awareness,
Uh,
but just thinking about like there's always underneath an empire this desire to obtain power and getting that power through wealth and hoarding of resources, right? In order to
mm,
do that, you have to exploit. At some point, you are expanding, you're colonizing, you're oppressing, and subjugating people. And then you have the need to protect those resources because you've now
that you
gone and
stole.
exploited every other
Yeah.
place or other places and other people. And that's just not how people work. Like people want to, get justice. They want to be able to thrive. And
They just want to live their lives, right?
right,
Like
exactly.
they just want to, feed their families, like do their
Hmm.
shit and be left alone for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, we all want the same things. And I think that's one of the dangers of, existing in this type of way is that there's a us versus them mentality that exists, where it's like we're disconnected from each other. But when you get to the core of people, it's like we all do kind of want just the same things to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. And survive in a way that doesn't feel like we have to like scrape for every scrap that we get,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
like survive in a way that feels sustainable at the very least, even if it isn't like because I think if survival is hard, that's different than it being sustainable,
Agree. Yes. Yes.
you know?
And it's never been easy. I
It's
mean,
never been easy.
every every age of
Yeah.
humanity, survival has been difficult. We've
Yeah.
not been able to withstand nature. We've not been able to withstand,
Each other.
the changes of exactly each other and coming in contact with other species. Like that's just the story of humanity.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's a very different reality that we exist in, at least right now, where we've been
Yeah.
able to navigate science and nature and all these other things, but now the issue lies more so with us.
Yeah.
And so,
And
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something very much about like I feel similar about all of my friends, all of my circles are like, ah, yes, the crumbles, you know? And like how the running joke amongst me and my friends right now is kind of like, oh, it's nice to have you to be friends for the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
And before I think I thought about it as like the crumbles, right? Because it just feels like large chunks of society that never really worked to begin with are like falling off. And
Yeah.
ever since the pandemic, it's just been speeding
True.
along, and it feels like a bus, right? And the bus is going, and the road ends. We see the road has
Yeah.
ended. There is a
Yeah.
cliff, and yet it is pedal to the metal, and we're just like full steaming ahead.
Yeah.
And I think a part of that is like the self-eating machine of capitalism and of
Yeah.
like US colonialism,
Yeah.
right? And how exactly like what you said, they went out, colonized, exploited,
Hmm.
subjugated everybody else, and then it just kind of like inks
Hmm.
slowly but surely back into the center, right?
Yeah.
And so like now here we are being eaten by our own machine.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So, imperialism
Yep.
the way of how we must operate to protect our
Yeah.
resources that we've already exploited and we continue to exploit. And then, then there's this natural hierarchy that I think exists, but unfortunately, the lie of separatism that continues to exist amongst us as people. And like I said, that us versus me mentality I'm
Yeah,
sorry, us versus them, me versus you, me
totally.
versus self,
Yes.
just a
Yeah.
true disconnect from the essence of who we actually
Of
are.
yes, of our own selves. So it's like,
Yeah,
how can we hope to connect to other people if we're
yeah,
not right with ourselves?
yeah.
Yeah.
And which is why I think, decolonizing is still so vital.
Yeah.
We
And
talk about.
it's like decolonizing in history, right? And I think like, like you said, everybody who's vibing with us right now at least knows a little bit about history. And
Hmm.
it's like wild thinking about the end of like the British Empire and the Ottoman Empire and the Roman Empire
Hmm.
and how like here we are in the
Yep.
same place, except
Yeah,
like
yeah,
2000 years later.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I spent a little bit of time just kind of like researching that and looking into like what are the signs of the end of an empire.
Yeah.
And, one of them
Love
was
that.
economic collapse,
Totally.
inflation,
Ah, who's
and
she?
taxation that get the best of us, right? And I mean, that is exactly what we're experiencing right now. And we have
Yeah.
been for quite some time, but it
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the end of the Roman Empire had like, the Roman Empire was spread out so far that they couldn't even protect their own borders, which is why
Yeah,
it kind of ended up like falling in from the inside.
that's
And
right.
that's kind of what it feels like now. We're so outstretched, right? That like
Mhm.
we can't keep our own social order intact,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? And so things are falling in. And I think also this like lie of separatism, um, I don't know, race makes me think about that, right? The fact
Yeah.
that we're not all that different from each other, except we just kind of look different. Even
That's right.
then, we don't even look that different, right? We're just different colors.
True.
We like have different hair
True.
textures,
Yeah.
right? But like we all kind of look the same. But there's something about just like these surface level changes that makes us feel like, oh no, these are other people over there, right? I also kind of wonder, and I think this is sticky for me about um the lie of separatism and then also like what we do with Trump people.
With Trump folks.
Yeah, with Trump people. Yeah, like we are not that like we are not all together that different, and yet we have this portion of the population that like doesn't want to act right,
Yeah.
and it's like I don't think that they're all together that much different than us, right? But there's this need to shun them at the very same.
Yeah. No,
And I,
agree.
and I don't really know what to do with that, right? And this feels kind of like the stickiness between Trump being gross and doing a whole bunch of bad things, right? And then like him needing to go to jail, but also not believing in jail.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that makes me think about a post that I saw not too long ago on Instagram. And he was saying how, like, let's not forget that Trump doesn't exist on his own, right? Like, he is a representation of what is a collective, like, desire, energy, he is co-created. Trump
Totally.
is not
Ooh.
president, right, for no reason. Like, people voted for him.
Yeah.
So he
And a lot of
represents like
people.
a large majority of the way so many people, at least at this point right now, exist and think and feel. And so, it's really unfortunate because even in my own family, like just the other day, during as we were having dinner, there were a couple of people at the table who were starting to talk about Trump in a way that was really problematic for me, where they were kind of identifying with certain things. And don't get me wrong, because I do believe in duality. I believe that
Totally.
there's no, binary way of looking at anybody or anything, right? Like there are things that Trump stands for and represents that I probably agree with, right? But that wouldn't be how I characterize him,
A
you know,
broken clock is right twice a day.
that part. So, you know what I mean? So I do want to also make space for that. But like when we think about just what he represents, because he does represent, like he has like an archetype as
Is
being someone,
actually. Yes,
who is
absolutely.
openly,
A
racist
classic American. Yes.
and yeah, and white supremacist and you know what I mean,
Misogynist.
misogynist and just, all of the
All
isms.
the things.
And the obvious. So it's so that in and of itself is a problem. And I think when we get to a place where people, especially who look like, you and I are starting to identify in this way so openly, like it really for me speaks to the disconnect. that people feel, and like the inability to truly understand the way that systems work. And it always comes back to systems for me,
Oh, yes,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. But I think this is too part of why it's so important to um the GOP and, you know, everyone who kind of like identifies with Trump in some way to do this banning of the books and limiting information, because as long as
Yeah.
people continue to stay in the darkness and not
Woo.
truly understand, right, how the systems work and where they come from and who they truly are, they are more susceptible and vulnerable, right,
Yeah.
to feeling like they'll accept even the littlest breadcrumbs from you,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Over
Yeah.
really fighting for what they actually deserve and,
Yeah.
you know, being able to at least um, identify and be self-aware enough to say, like, no, this actually is not in my best interest.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, let me actually look at the whole
Right. The
book that
totality.
you're like the totality of the thing, and like even the whole menu, right?
Yeah.
And it's like they're giving us snapshots of things and being like, oh yes, this works well for like this one moment in time for like this one particular interest, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about like single issue voters here,
Yeah.
right? Like this
Yes.
is working for this moment at this
Hmm.
time for this reason, and not looking at the whole
Yeah.
thing. And I also kind of feel like exactly the banning of the books, like that's when we need to start, like, why would we ever want to back anybody who bans books or who burns books, right? Like, that to me is like grade A, we don't want you to know anything, right? And it's way easier to subjugate people and get people to do the things that are against their self-interest, and get people to do like the
Yeah.
things that they don't even need if they don't know that that's what they need, right?
That's
And I
right.
think America has done such a good job of like disconnecting ourselves from our cultures generally, that just like keeping knowledge out of our heads is the thing, right? Which is like, I think another reason why the education system is so fucked, right?
Yep.
Is that like, I think there isn't really a need to fix it, because if we had folks who were really good at critical thinking and really good at problem
Oh,
solving,
that.
right, then
Mm.
a lot of the systems that we exist in would not make any sense.
Exactly. Yeah. The critical thinking piece is
Is I just
sorely missing.
is yes. And I think I've had so many conversations with folks about like how homelessness works, right? And then them being like, well, this is just how it is. And I'm like, what if it didn't? Right. And then like they can't even think about what if it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And why are we okay with just accepting that?
That this it's ass, like that the
Right.
bar is in hell.
Yeah. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because even if we can't figure it out, why are we okay with just accepting that the government hasn't prioritized figuring that out? They figure out every other thing. You can figure out how
We
to get to Mars, but we can't end
Yes.
homelessness.
You can figure out how to bomb children in Somalia without a person manning it. And yet we can't figure out homelessness. What?
And not to mention the fact that it has actually already been figured out, and there have been
Yeah.
places that have actually solved this problem multiple times over. But you know,
Yeah.
but again, those are the things that continue to slide under the radar and slip through the cracks, because it's the part about truth sounding like hate to those who
Yeah.
hate the truth, right? And I
Right.
don't even want to say that people hate truth. I just think that unfortunately these days, and it's been like this at least for a while for me, it's like
Confirmation
when
bias.
you start to speak about the actual truth, people think that you're radical. They literally call you radical these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
And
just,
it's
yeah, I mean that term, I identify with it because that's where I find most of my people.
yeah.
I don't identify with it because I'm like, this, if this is radical, it's really sad.
It's really sad because this is like baseline. Like,
Yeah.
yes, I would like people that have healthcare.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like people to not struggle for like food or housing.
Yeah.
Yes, like absolutely. And I don't think that makes me like necessarily radical to
Yeah.
want everybody to have like a baseline like level of care,
Yeah.
right? And yet it's what that is. And
Yeah.
I think also what while you were talking, it had me thinking about like confirmation bias, right? Like everything that
Right.
like that doesn't sound like thing that you've sound before, you're like, absolutely not, that's weird, right? And it's like,
Mhm. Yes,
it's
exactly. We
not.
have this need to prove what we already think is true, and not necessarily be open to outside perspectives. Um, and I think it goes back to the importance of language. It's another thing we talked to Phil about. It's like using a term like radical reinforces that this isn't something that can even realistically happen. It's
Right.
so out of like,
Out of our, yeah,
right?
our even imagination. Right.
Exactly, that it's radical. And so I
Right.
think that keeps us, even subconsciously feeling like these are,
Pipe
outlandish,
dreams.
yeah, like ways to think about solving problems and
Yeah.
actually creating solutions
And
to the issues that exist.
it's really not. It's just about having, and it's like, I think also like America's government is not a government, we're a corporation. And it's always been like that because our first major like product was enslavement, right? And
Yes.
everything has been based off of that rule book, right?
Hmm.
Everything from like the police having been like people catchers, right? Or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they would catch enslaved folks who were running, right? And I mean like also that we have the medical system,
Yep.
which is fucking shaky because
Yeah.
it's kind of like based off of like you can't have a medical system that actually works for people if it was based in a society that fundamentally doesn't care about like two-thirds of the population,
Yeah. Exactly.
right? Or even three-fourths of the population, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean, and yeah, and you can't have any system or institution actually serve the people if at the core of the founding of that institution is a desire for wealth and greed.
totally,
Because every
totally.
single one of these come back to, capitalistic gain and
Money.
money.
Yeah.
Money.
And it's like, what if we had systems that actually weren't about money? They were about people.
Right.
Whoa, right?
A
Crazy.
radical idea.
A radical idea. And it's like I made a joke with some of my friends that I would love to be a sugar baby one day. And then I had a friend like straight up laugh in my face and be like, T, you hate capitalism too much for that. And I think they're right. I think they're right. But I also think that like, sure, if we must have systems that like value money, then like sure, go for it. But there
Hmm.
are so many of them that we don't need money to think about, right? Like if you're sick,
Yeah.
you should get cared for, right? Like
Right.
if you don't have housing, you should have housing. If you
Yeah.
don't have food, you should have food.
Yeah.
Anything that deals with like human welfare, child welfare,
Yeah.
medical assistance should
Yeah.
not be about the bottom line because the bottom line isn't about how much money you get. It's about whether or not you have a functioning, happy, healthy force, right? And I
That's
think
right.
that's the other thing. It's like, I think America is like, this is a corporation, which doesn't necessarily count on the folks who are making the corporation run being happy, right? Like they're
Mhm.
locked in ways that they don't necessarily have a choice in. But I
Yeah.
think governments and societies, if the people are not happy or like generally content or have their needs met, shit starts to break down really quickly because like folks will not do the things
Yeah.
that require this to be done.
That's
And
right.
we see it all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's happening all the time. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Fully agree. So here we are. A Trump presidency is upon us.
part two.
Thank God there's only two parts,
Fuck. But like
right?
also, who knows what's going to happen at the end of this? Because we saw what happened
True.
at the end of the first Trump
Yeah.
presidency when he was like, "What if I was just president forever?" And we were like,
Right.
"Ooh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yikes!"
True.
Right?
True.
Like,
That's a
who knows
good
if
point.
voting is going to be
Because
a
we never
thing?
know what follows. Like, can you remember when Trump was running for president? We all thought it was like a big joke. Like the dude from The
Yeah, I
Apprentice.
do. Yeah, yeah, I
Like
do. I
he's never
do.
gonna get, you know what I mean? And look, here we are
Here we
again.
are. But again, history repeats itself because that's what they were saying about Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a movie star, and then he was like, "I'm running for president," and people were like, "Ooh, conservatives."
And what does that tell us about like the
The
over
nature of celebrity
that? Yes.
and how we conflate celebrity with
Mm-hmm.
having the skills to govern,
Yeah. Yeah.
which as a matter of fact I would say are like actually at odds,
Agree.
right?
Full.
Like celebrity is not necessarily about governing.
Mm-hmm.
Celebrity is about oneself and like one standing in some way, but it's not about making decisions. And I think
Yeah.
especially the way that like it's like we idolize people because they're good at doing a thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And being a good actor probably doesn't actually make you a good government person.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Think.
Because
You would assume, but
like I don't think these
but
are
a lot, I
necessarily the
think
same
it also
skills.
speaks to the fact that it always goes back to the way that we idolize wealth and money,
Yeah.
because that's what I think why celebrity has such a stronghold on our culture too, is because for a lot of us, we are aiming to reach that level or that status that celebrities have reached. We equate that with freedom, with power, right? So it's really
Yeah,
actually not
I do.
surprising that Trump was
Yeah,
able to do what he did. And, that this won't, it's especially with social media being as, integrated into how we operate day to day now, like that being the
yeah,
platform for how we determine who our leaders are.
yeah,
I mean, just
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah.
Kamala's campaign was so riddled with celebrity influence and right, like more than anything, I think I saw more of that than I heard about her policies.
Yeah,
I mean, not that it
yeah.
helped, but
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And I think we see similar things with like Joe Rogan, right, and Andrew Tate on the right, right?
yes,
Of like
yeah.
of being yeah, so like one of the articles
Mhm.
I read, it was about the manosphere from the Guardian was
Yep,
talking
read that.
about yeah, was talking about how the internet has created echo chambers in
Hmm.
some ways, right? And those echo chambers kind of make us those echo chambers are just like reinforcing things that
Yeah.
we maybe even don't even believe, right? But it's like a dude who's getting into gaming. Every gaming platform that he's going to get into is filled with dudes who are sprouting stuff that Joe Rogan
Hmm.
has said, that Andrew Tate has said. And so
Yeah.
even if you don't necessarily buy into those policies, you're going to be surrounded by those kinds of thoughts and policies. And so it might like get in,
Yeah. That's
right?
right. Yeah.
I
Podcasters had
had,
a huge influence on
yeah, especially
apparently
these
this
like
voting group. Yeah.
yes, especially, and so like the voting group that we're talking about right now is like the 18 to 25,
Yeah.
sorry, 18 to 29 males,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
The young boys. And it's
Hmm.
like the podcasts, the internet, the video game platforms are all the places where like these kids are getting like most of their information and
Yeah.
like also understanding their worldview. And like what's interesting is that these places are kind of homogenous in the way that we see similar kinds of demographics of like
Hmm.
age, right? And like gender. And like there isn't a lot of like cross-cultural,
Not
right?
at
Depending,
all.
not
Right.
at all, right? And it's like I think if you want a cross-cultural experience, you have to go to a place that's like
Mhm.
specifically like that, right?
Yeah.
But like generally, you're gonna get a lot of this like manosphere stuff.
Yeah. Agree. And I think that feels really dangerous in some ways.
Yeah, it is.
Especially because of the way that the government house has counteracted like access to information and how it's
Yeah,
being controlled, right?
yeah.
So this is unregulated. People can tap into these podcasts as much as they want to and be
And it's
influenced.
not fat checked.
Exactly. Exactly, right? Yet they can't access books that really teach them, right? Like
Yeah,
the way the entire founding of this country truly came to be.
right.
And in
Actual
and in
history.
that sense makes it very unequal and very
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah, and I think like that's the other thing about, and I feel like history is like the key to all of this,
Yeah.
and also not a history like a propagandized history or like
Right.
a winner's version of history, like a this is what actually happened
Yeah.
kind of history, right? You have people, and especially white men, 18 to 25, being thinking that they're being labeled oppressors for no reason, right? And then they're like, I don't have anything to do with this. Why am I the bad guy? Please leave me out of this. So I'm going to vote for the bad guy.
Right.
Right. And it's like, we're not necessarily even talking about you, young white man, young
Hmm.
like 21-year-old white man. We're talking about a lot of folks who look like you. We're also talking about because you've been born into the system, you have privileges, right?
Hmm.
You are allowed to do things that other
Yeah.
people have not. What we're asking is
Yeah.
that you think about this and talk to your fellow man about how
Yeah.
weird this is,
Exactly.
right? And it's like also,
Exactly.
I think also the bar is kind of low because it's like, especially if you're young,
Hmm.
right? We're not asking you like, and especially if you feel like you haven't oppressed anybody yet, like, why don't like let's just like make sure that you have a good idea about what women are.
Mm.
The correct answer to this is people, right? Or like what black people are. Again, the
Yeah.
correct answer is people, right?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
have you talked to people? If you're a young white man, go talk to someone. And if they
Hmm.
don't like you, maybe you should think about that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Talk to your friends about women. Don't call them bitches or whores,
Hmm.
right? And like see how hard or easy that is. And I think that's like where the work is. And I think when we have a lot of these kids who veer right towards
Hmm.
the right, it's a lack of consciousness on their part, right? And a lack of like an actual kind of understanding about the systems that they were born into and like
True.
what this whole thing is.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, especially for that particular demographic, the 18 to 29s.
Mhm.
And I also believe that there is a very conscious effort to push back too
Yeah.
against, right, what they perceive as losing their rights. Like you said, they're feeling oppressed, right? Because women's rights are way more prevalent than they've been in the past. Disability rights, LGBTQ
Yeah.
rights, Black Lives Matter.
Black parents. Yep.
So many different things that are being, generated to co-create a more equitable society, and they're starting to feel that. So
Yeah.
this election was a way for them to really push back against that,
Right.
right,
Right.
consciously.
Right.
And I do think that, like you said, that particular demographic probably are less informed um in some ways than their fathers or grandfathers, but I
And they're in
definitely
less.
don't want to negate the influence that they have as well.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. The other thing that I wanted to say, oh, was that I think is like really interesting, and something to keep an eye on, especially as like we keep rolling, right? Is that there's like this huge ideological gap opening between men and women, especially in that age group. And I think it
Yes.
started with like us as millennials, and like the
Mm.
Gen Z is getting worse, right? Where like women are leaning right and like a lot of queer folks are leaning sorry left. Women and queer folks are leaning
Mhm.
left and men are leaning right, and so we see this like
Yes.
huge ideological gap opening up.
Yes.
And I think like this, and it makes me think about incels particularly, right? Like like the folks who hate women and they
Yep.
don't understand why women don't like them, but they
Yeah.
keep saying really awful things and doing awful things and like not thinking about women as women, and also thinking about also the fact that they're not getting fucked and how that's a problem for everybody else, right? It's not like a personal problem. Like if nobody wants to have sex with you, you should probably do some do some deep dives, you know?
Yeah. You've got other
Yeah.
issues.
You've got other issues. Okay. And then likewise, South Korea,
Yes. I
right?
saw that.
So there was a big gap where there was like maybe a 50-point gap between men and women in South Korea. And South Korea is also the place that's having the 4B movement. For those of
That's
you who
right.
don't know about the 4B movement,
Yeah.
it's where women in South Korea was like, listen, men, y'all are fucked.
We're
And I
done.
refuse to fuck you until
Yeah.
you get unfucked, right?
Mhm.
So we have birth rates plummeting, we have marriages
Yes.
plummeting, right? And we
Mhm.
have men and women being completely and utterly separated, except at work, where men are usually the folks who are in charge, right? And the women are like
Yeah.
small, demure,
Yeah.
right? Doing
Yep.
their jobs. And then they're like, you act so small and demure at work. Why won't you go out with me? And it's like,
Mm.
I have to have a job, right? But I'm
Yeah.
not like spending my free time with you.
You know, and just more power to the women in South Korea, because like it makes me wonder why. In some ways, it almost feels to me like we in America feel like we have access. Women here in America, we feel like we have access to a certain degree of power that keeps us kind of in this really weird space where we're still not pushing back enough. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like we're not
It could get a lot weirder.
right. And I
I
mean, and they're
agree.
showing us that this is possible, right?
Yes.
And I think we've internalized so much patriarchy, and not to blame us, right? Because this is how we're socialized. But I just love what they're doing in South Korea, and I think we can learn so much from that movement. You know,
Yeah. And I think the beautiful thing about that movement is that it's grassroots, right?
yes,
It's just like a whole bunch of people making a decision,
and just being like,
right?
"Hey, we're
And
done."
being like, you know what, we're out. And I feel like it's a similar thing about like, like the BDS Starbucks
Mm,
boycott, right? Where like
yes,
just a bunch of folks were just like, you know what, we're gonna make a decision to not do this.
yeah,
And how much change can happen just from like making a collective decision, right? Like it
that's
doesn't
right.
have to be a policy, it doesn't have to be coming from the government. We can just like all collectively be like, nah, I'm
Yeah,
opting out.
fully agree. Fully agree.
Right. And like I don't know if not fucking men. Listen, I have not fucked men for a long time and I am proud about that. But but like I don't know if not fucking men is like going to be how we fix the problem.
How
But
we
I
move the
also
needle.
think
Yeah,
how we move the needle, I don't know if that's like really like the thing, but I also know that when men like, but I also know if there isn't a physical repercussion of gender gaps and gender ideology and gender roles, then I don't know if men are actually going to get it. And
I
I think there
agree.
are like, so like, for those, I'm a teacher, I work at a university, I work with a lot of kids who are 18, right? And it's so interesting because I have one kid in my class right now who's 18 and like such a feminist, right? He's
Hmm.
like such a feminist. He's like really about like race and racism, right? And like really talking about it and like really being about it, right? And he's like,
Love it. Love it.
right, and he's like super duper white, super duper about it. And then I have a lot of other guys who, I had a kid who like wrote a paper on race and he refused to even talk about it. It
Mm.
was so strange, right? But and so we
Wow.
also have guys who like can't talk
Mm.
to women necessarily and can't talk about race.
Yeah.
And then also we have a lot of, and like a lot of them seem to be like unsure about how to live, like unsure about how to be in a mixed
And that's a good space
classroom.
to be in, though. I think
Right.
if you are a male, if you're a man, if that's a good space to be in, because that's where it starts. You've been socialized to be who you are, right?
Yeah. In
And
a lot of ways.
in so many ways. And it's like there's a culture of masculine, there's a culture of what it means to be a man. And
Yes.
so I know for the men who are at a place where they're ready to start questioning those things,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a very normal and good place to be in where you're like, I don't know. I just don't know. Like, and I think for some, I've seen like this opposite where it's like, I don't identify with anything relating to masculinity or what it means to be a man. And like that's also a really great place to be. And I
Mhm.
think trying to cling to like some sense of like what makes sense and being confused, there's nothing to feel shameful about as it relates to that, you
Yes.
know? So I really kind of like to hear that, if I'm understanding you correctly, that that's where they are and they don't really like understand. Um, but I just hope that they don't revert backwards,
Yeah.
to what is socially acceptable or what feels more familiar. Cause
Yeah.
yeah.
I, I think so. Like my co-teacher is female and white, and I am femme presenting and black, and so we have some males, which is like very normal, who like won't listen, who don't listen to either of us, right? And
Yep, it
like
happens.
refuse to see either of us as like a as an authority figure,
I've been there and I'm
right?
regularly there. Yes.
And I'm regularly there,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think also like as a black person who works at a PWI, like
Yep.
I'm there a lot.
It's
I'm there a lot.
compounded. That's
It's
right.
compounded, exactly. And then we also have dudes. We have some kids who are like who seem to not recognize that both of us are like either femme or black or whatever, and just like, yeah, this is the teacher. I'm gonna listen to him. That's great, right? And
Yeah.
then we have
Yeah.
some kids who like they feel kind of in the middle, where like they're drawn by the authority, but they're also like um weirded out by the social dynamics. And
Mm,
so there was like a couple of articles that I read that was talking about how the internet has kind of created gendered or like same spheres, right? Where like echo chambers where you get to hear the things that are
mm,
kind of relating to you, right? And I think this is one of the things that was about young men voting for Trump rather than Kamala was that um, the Kamala campaign apparently didn't inherently speak to them as men, which I I don't know, the older I get, there are things where I'm like, I will never understand. Like I will never understand. And like I think this is just one thing that I like, what do you mean they weren't speaking to you as a man? Like what does that even mean?
right.
Right?
That's my
And
question.
that's my question. And the Trump campaign was talking to you like a man?
Mm.
And what was that? What was
Because
that?
when we get to the
Besides,
bottom line of this, is the Harris campaign didn't allow you to believe that you were going to continue to probably maintain the privilege in the ways that you have, right? I think just by I, this is one of the things about identity politics and like the paradox of it,
yes,
because right,
yes,
just from showing up
yes,
as a woman, right, who is a
yes.
woman of color, like that in and of itself, that representation is already right planting
You're like,
seed, right, in
yes.
the minds of men that they're not going to be able to continue to hold on to, right, the privileges, many of them, right, that they've had. So I understand what they mean, but let's call a thing a thing. This isn't about them not speaking to your manhood, right? This is about them speaking to more of an equitable and inclusive society in some ways, because I do believe that Harris's campaign was super right leaning. So we didn't
Yeah,
really
this is
address the thing.
America.
Who wasn't spoken
Yeah.
to was the poor. Okay. Who was not
Yeah.
spoken to were the disabled. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about who was not
Let's talk
actually.
about that.
So
Yes.
they barely touched the surface. So I'm really concerned with
Yes.
this idea that the Harris campaign didn't speak to men,
Yeah.
because that's code for something else.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, and especially if we compare what the Trump team was speaking about, right? They were
Exactly.
speaking about like, oh, being able to do whatever you want,
That's
right?
right.
They were speaking about being able to like having a family is a right and not a privilege, right?
Right.
Right? Or like or like having power over someone else is a right and not a privilege. Which
Yeah.
like I don't think it's either,
Yeah.
right? Like you just shouldn't have that. And it's like, and I think the other thing was that men not seeing abortion as a, this
Mm,
is the thing that really kills me, right? About
yeah.
like men, especially men who voted for Trump, being like, I'm not misogynist, I'm not racist, I just want to live a good life. And it's like, and you think living a good life means that abortion isn't a thing,
Yeah.
right? Means that like like mass deportations means
Yeah.
like all of these things, right? And abortion is like abortion obviously is a women issue, it's a queer issue, but it's also
Yeah.
just like a human issue because you can't, like, we're not self-producing species.
Exactly.
We don't just like spawn children. We
Mhm.
need two things, right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? And it's like, do you just not understand how babies are made? Or do you not understand responsibility?
Yeah.
Or do you, right? Like I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
I think it's unfortunate. I mean, reading through the articles, like the one where you that you share, where it says we asked young men why they voted for Donald Trump, and here's what they
Here's what they
said.
said from
And it
Glamour.
was just all of this, like I genuinely voted for Trump mainly because he didn't make me feel bad for being a man,
Crazy.
right? And it's like
Crazy.
what I want to say to the not all men crew, because that's what they're becoming. They're becoming the crew of, well, not all men. I'm not one of those men. You are the problem. I want to
Hmm.
say that plain and clear. If you are in the not all men crew, you are the problem, because you have many different ways to respond to the challenges. You have many different ways to rise to the occasion. And it's the one way that you chose to do that is to say that it's not you, it's them. Like, how
Taking
does that
responsibility.
eliminate the issues that exist?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have a responsibility. If it's not
Yeah.
you, congratulations. Now, what can you do about the other 99% that it
Thank
is?
you.
Because they don't
Yes.
listen to us. They listen to you.
Literally, they only listen to other men. So what are you
You
doing
are the
about it?
problem.
You are the
You are the
problem
problem because you're taking up space and not doing anything with it.
with it.
And there's something that can be done with that space, right? And so you chose to vote for Trump. Not to say that, and I have all types of feelings about voting for Harris. However, my point being, do something with this I'm not that person energy that you're bringing. But what you're
Right.
doing right now is just not beneficial to the collective, right?
Yeah.
And with privilege comes responsibility too.
Yeah. It's like I'm hearing a lot of like, um, it's not me. It's like I'm hearing a lot of it's not me, but I'm not also not hearing a lot of like I'm gonna do anything about it.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
where's the responsibility of understanding that it never had to be you individually for it to be an issue,
Right.
right? And that in and of itself is privilege, because you
Right.
don't even have to think about that.
Right. I think even the baseline of like they made me feel bad, so I voted for the fascists is
Oh,
like this is privilege. This is it. And this is it. And I think like that's the other thing. You get to choose fascism because you
yes,
felt bad.
that's right.
You have that option. The rest of us don't get to choose fascism because we feel bad. Right?
Exactly.
Or like Harris made me feel icky. Harris did make me feel icky. But like I'm still not gonna choose the fascist.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the blatantly fascist, right?
That's right. That's right.
And it's like, and I think that's the other thing. It's like if you didn't vote, love. If you voted third party, love. If you voted for Harris, that's great. But if you voted for Trump, why? Like, let's actually really talk about it.
Yeah. Right. Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And I think there's just like again the whole like that was the thing about that article that really stuck out to me was that they were, while they knew that abortion was one of the major things on the table, they just didn't think it was their issue.
Exactly.
right?
And
Which
this is a
again
people
is
issue. This is a society
this is a,
issue. This is a human issue.
right. And this is again like the whole like so I think that's the thing about the Trump thing that I want to get out is that identity politics were a huge problem, and we can see like where identity politics go wrong here because we see
Right.
like and like as much as I want to roll my eyes at it, and as much as I do roll my eyes at it, I think that's something, right? That like there's something in the identity politics of it all that we have a whole group of people disavowing themselves from it because they're not either women or brown, right?
Mm.
And like I think that's stupid, right? Because like there's a lot more to it, but I think there is something about like policies can't be based on identity; they have to be based on policies, right?
They do. They do. And somehow, some way, men have found a way to really center themselves again,
Again,
right? I mean,
God
just
damn
looking
it.
at the title of that one of the other articles you sent with it was a fatal miscalculation,
Calculation,
masculinity,
masculinity researcher
Richard
Richard
Reeves
Reeves
on why
on what
Democrats lost young
young
men.
men. And then also that article pissed me off because he was just like, why won't they say at least one thing for the men? Like, why don't y'all talk to each other? Shit.
You mean like all the other elections that happened before this? Like,
Thank you. Wow. Finally, people are talking to other people in society who can vote, like
yeah,
women and brown
and
people. And
barely
now
at
white
that,
men are like,
barely.
barely,
Yeah,
barely. And
yeah.
also, like, how they were talking to women and brown people were like, we're not Trump, which is like not.
Yeah. And what irritates me the most about all of this dialogue and this rhetoric that's being spewed out is that it continues to keep us from really calling out what's really happening here, which is like actual misogyny.
Yeah.
So it's like we're going all the way around it to, well, I don't feel like I'm being heard and I don't feel like I was talked to. I don't feel like, can we also just talk about what's happening that no one has named yet, which is that you all are, a lot of you are misogynists.
Yeah.
And you
And
also don't want to see a woman be president.
yes. This is the thing. And like, okay, so honestly, this has been really hard for me to articulate in the several years that I've been a voting adult, especially since the Hillary Clinton debacle, the great Hillary Clinton debacle of 2016, of like Trump getting elected over Hillary. And the whole time we were all
Yes.
kind of like, we were giggling, right? Because we were
Yeah.
like, he clearly doesn't know anything. He's clearly a narcissist. He's clearly just like talking out of his ass.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, while she's a capitalist, absolutely, and
Yes.
like like that particular brand of like US born politician, right, that's like been born and bred as a politician,
Yeah.
she knows policy, she's been places, she talks to people, and
Yeah.
she like legitimately knows what she's doing, right, like
Oh,
knows what she's doing, and yet we're choosing the guy who talks out of his ass, right? And then like my other thing, and it's like I don't really know what to do with this, and like on one hand good for you for like wanting to put up Kamala as like our Democratic nominee, but like if Hillary couldn't win against Trump, what in hell made you think that Kamala was going to win against Trump?
I almost felt like
And this was after 2020 when like everybody kind of realized where everybody else stood, right?
it's like they just passed them the ball. Like that's how I was
They
looking at
did.
it.
That's exactly what they did.
And
That's
I didn't,
exactly what they did.
and then like all of the dialogue in the conversations were like, oh, don't be so negative and pessimistic. We're finally probably there. America will vote in a black woman for president. I'm
No, you
like,
won't.
listen, y'all.
No, you won't. The America that I was born into would never vote a black woman
Just
into
4
president.
years ago, we were protesting in the streets for George Floyd. Really?
Yes.
I just want to make sure we understand what's happening and where
What's
we are.
happening? We literally, our courts blamed Breonna Taylor's boyfriend for her death.
And we're still talking about this
And
and we're still dealing with it. It just happened like 3 weeks ago.
thank you.
Like it's I just I really
Yeah.
at a place where I want to say this. The irony of the is there going to be anything for men argument is that men still want so in one breath, it's not all men. And then in the other breath, it's is there anything for us as men? So you are a monolith. I just want to make sure I understand. Are you or are you
Are
not?
you or are you not Amala?
Which one are you?
Yeah, right.
Because
Right.
what are men's issues?
Right. Ah! I'm sorry, I'm screaming. What are men's issues, Ina?
I'm just curious. What are men's
Maybe we just need to get a man on this podcast and be like, tell me, what are your issues?
I really want to understand because I could have sworn that this was about, and this is again, they continue to just kind of tell on themselves. And we want to be open to having conversations with men who feel this way. We want to
Right.
understand what really the issues are, but we just
Please.
continue to be told
Right.
that you are crying because
It
you're
it
losing your and nobody
my
we
yes.
I'm not I can't I'm not making
And
space
it's
for
like I really want to talk about it, but as soon as it starts sounding like misogyny,
yeah.
as soon as it starts sounding like racism, I'm out, bro.
Yeah, like we're not talking about
We're
anything.
not talking about it like we're not talking about men's issues anymore,
Yeah.
right?
And yeah.
And also it's like what men's issues are just ends up being like people issues, right? So like there's so as my days on as a miscreant on the internet, um, I was reading articles about like men's rights activists thinking particularly about like divorce and children getting like pretty much automatically going to the mother rather than the father, even if the mother isn't a great fit. And I think that that is not necessarily a men's rights issue. That's like a court issue also, right? That's
Exactly.
also a family issue. That's also
Yes.
a gender role issue, right? Where
Yeah.
like there are a whole bunch of courts that are like, well, like women are better like caretakers, therefore, right? Even though literally not that long ago in the 80s and early 90s, there was literally people like children who would get sexually abused by their fathers. The courts wouldn't believe that a child's father would sexually abuse them, and so when the mother wanted to file for divorce and get full custody, the court would label the mother as like deranged or unstable and would
Yeah.
give the child back to their father, right? And so there was this whole underground network in the 80s and 90s of children being like kind of kidnapped by their mother and being kept in safe houses
Yeah.
until like their court case resolved, until something else happened, right?
Yeah.
And like that is as evidence to say that like this isn't necessarily about men, this is about family courts, right? This is about
Yes.
courts in general. So it's
Yeah.
like what are your issues, and can you identify an issue that doesn't deal with women?
That I would really like to know. And of all of the conversations that I've heard, I've never heard anyone even mention that. That might be a viable one, but I've never even heard that.
Right, it's actually it's like viable, it's real, right?
Yeah.
Like yeah, a lot of women do get children when maybe
Yeah.
they oughtn't to have, right? But also like instead of like using this to talk about like but again like this is about courts and judges, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Like
exactly.
men can absolutely be great caretakers and men can be great fathers, and that isn't
Yeah.
what's at issue, right? And I think a lot of us know a dude or know somebody who has a great or know who somebody who has a great dad who is a great dad, right? Who
Yeah.
like loves that, and
That's
we
right.
want to see more of it, and we also see a lot on the other hand.
Yeah, very true. Um, so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, are you seeing any of this in your own life? So what I mean when I ask that question is, and in what ways? Like, are you in conversation with men who are like kind of reflecting this back to you, like where they feel connected to Trump in some way, or they voted for Trump, or they feel that their issues are not being addressed, and that they have actual issues? I'm just curious. Is this
Yeah,
something we're seeing reflected in our everyday lives? I personally am, but I wanted
yeah.
to know if you
See,
were.
my issue is that I don't actually have a lot of cis male friends. I have two.
Okay. Same.
Because
Same. Yeah.
because men.
Yeah.
Um, and I think from like this, my cis male friends, I think we already have a lot of conversations about what masculinity is and
Yeah.
about like the ways that masculinity is played. And I think a lot of them have, and I actually would like to ask them about how their brethren are dealing
Yeah.
with this or if they're reflecting on it at all.
Hmm.
But I think there is kind of like a general understanding about like Trump is weaponizing
Yeah.
masculinity in a way that like it oughtn't be, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I also think that and I also have friends like so I'm queer, I have a lot of like trans male friends.
Hmm.
And I think in the queer community, like while there definitely is misogyny and it comes from
Hmm.
all sorts, right?
Yep.
We see
That's
like
right.
masked lesbians who have like like a chip on like misogyny chip on their shoulder, and so they
Yep.
want to treat women badly, right? And
Yeah.
like it can be the same for trans men, but I think
So true.
generally yes.
Hmm.
But I think generally like there's not so much of a conflation between what masculinity is like as a
Right.
thing versus
Right.
what it's being yielded as or wielded
Hmm.
as.
Yeah. Okay.
That is a good question. I'm gonna be like, because I have a friend, one of my cis male friend is in a frat of all things, and
Oh,
so he has like a lot of broy, right, male
mm,
friends, and so I think it might just be like, yeah. So how have the boys been?
yeah.
And I
Yeah, I
also
think
kind of
it's worth
wonder,
talking
yeah, it's
about,
worth thinking
just to
about and talking about.
understand how this, because we're reading about all these ideological differences and how we're polarized, and
Yeah,
gender is playing a
yeah.
part in that. And I'm just curious, are we seeing that in our
I
everyday lives?
I see it in my classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think like like I said earlier, there have always been men who think I'm not shit because of what I look
Hmm.
like. But I
Yeah.
think that, especially right now, I'm in a class of more men than women, and the ideological gap starts to show themselves, especially when we think about things like the male gaze, right? Or we start thinking
Yes.
about like race and
Mhm.
gender as it applies in like a novel or a film,
Mhm.
right? In which
Mhm.
a lot of the girls in the class are like, yes, 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 this is a real thing. Here we see it. Here we're tracking it. And like
Mhm.
the dudes either don't see it, don't want to see it, want to
Mhm.
argue against it, right?
Automatically.
Right? Or like refuse to engage with it at all,
Yeah.
right? And
And
I
again,
think like
there's that privilege.
and there's that privilege, right? And I think that's the thing that I've been seeing at work, right? And like with students and like not just the young kids, but like a lot of the other ones, right? Like there is this kind of weird, like there's a distance created between kids who you can tell are in these like weird circles of the internet and like everybody else who are maybe in other circles.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Um, I would say for me, I feel more disconnected from men now than I ever have.
Oh yeah.
It's like the more
Again,
knowledge I
gestures
gain,
broadly. Yeah.
yeah, and the more I understand things, the more disconnected I feel from
Yeah.
men, because I
Yeah.
started to become really clear about like how much mistreatment I've experienced in the world, not just from the men, but just because of the way that we do exist in a patriarchy and how it's,
Yeah.
what I mean, favors
Yeah.
men and all of the thing. And it's just it's so difficult once you get that kind of information and that knowledge and then you see it everywhere to then be in relationship with men who refuse to see it or
Yeah.
don't want to talk about it or think
Because
you're
it
just complaining.
Yeah, because it's like you don't, because it's like, I think at that point it becomes hard to even be friends, right? Because
It
it's like,
is.
you don't even
Yeah.
really see me as a person if you're not
Yeah.
seeing all of this other shit that I deal with, right? Or,
Right.
or if you just like think that I'm bitching, right? That's
Yeah.
the worst because that's just
Yeah.
like playing into it.
That's right. And then, just even doing the self work of my own on my own of like being able to show up authentically and speak
Yeah.
freely and share openly
Yeah.
what I'm dealing with,
It's
like
amazing
showing
how
you
many
all
people will
of
run after
me.
that.
Yeah, you have to be able to make space for that. And a lot of men just aren't there. And so I
Right.
do think there is this divide. I fully agree. I think if social media plays a huge part in my own self knowledge, right? And I know that that's the case for a lot of young people. Um, and I'm really grateful for that. Like the Gen Zers um, that are coming up and their access to information is very different than what it was when we were younger. So, I see that divide becoming wider and wider and wider in real life. And I do have a couple of cis, you know, male friends who, um, one who voted for Trump, and he stated that he voted for Trump because he spoke more to when it came to like the economy and his finances in a way that he wanted him to, right? Um, but I also know that this person has deep mother wounds, right? So
Sorry.
regardless of the fact, a woman as a president was going to be a problem for him. He may not say that openly,
You
right?
may not
But
even
like we
really think it.
already know that that is a trigger for a lot of men. This
Yeah.
idea of a woman being in authority and all of the stereotypes that are negative about women being too emotional and women not knowing how to manage this and that, and you know what I mean? So that persists and that exists. And I just
Yeah.
think the more we kind of tiptoe around that, we don't really like call a
We're
thing
not. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody, because I've heard that too, right? Like, oh, I voted for Trump because of the economy. And it's like that always just feels like a code for something else, right?
Absolutely, especially if you're
Like
Black
I'm like, thank you. I'm like,
or working
kind of,
class.
thank you. I'm like, the economy tanked under Trump the last time.
Mhm.
And when it didn't, it was because it was still riding the tails off of Obama,
Right. And
right?
people don't want to say that
And
because
people
when
don't want to say
we
that.
talk about Biden, like he's cleaning up a lot of Trump's messes.
Literally. And also, and okay, this, I have two things to say.
Hmm.
So, so like one, so that, right, the economy trumped under the economy tanked under Trump. Actually, I would really like to turn the verb Trump into like, instead of like, this is a Trump card, like to trump
Yeah.
it is to plummet. Right,
Right.
like he trumped it, like he fucked it up, he dropped the
Yeah.
ball. Like so that, and it's like, are we really going to take economical advice from a dude who declared bankruptcy 7 times? Like,
That just
is
doesn't
that
matter. That
is
just
that
we just conveniently have, yeah,
did he
like
forget
selective, yeah, memory when it
memory?
comes to that.
Yeah. Okay, here's the other thing. And like, so this is, so after Trump won, I called my mom, and my mom is um older, Black,
Mm,
very much like about the Democrats, right?
yeah, my mom
Um,
too.
yeah, right. And my mom, like in a lot of ways, she mobilized literally her entire community to vote for Harris, which like I love that for her. I love
Yeah,
that for her. I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
think it's important to have a hobby when you're in your 60s, you know what I'm saying? But like I called her afterwards, and I think all of the things that I've been saying about like the government is fucking fishy, like they are in cahoots, right? My mom was like, no, 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 no. And then after Trump won, she was like, because I was like, listen, the math isn't mathing.
Yeah.
Why is it that ever since Reagan, we've had Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican,
Mm,
right? That, why is that?
didn't
Why is
even,
it?
yeah,
Why is
didn't,
it that every Republican, damn near every Republican, loses the majority
I agree.
vote, right? Why is it that every Republican tanks the economy and every Democrat works like hell to bring it back up? If that is the case, then why is it? And then, like, again, separately, why is it that Republicans are then breaking the rules,
Hmm.
right? Or like creating a new handbook and the Democrats are playing by the rules when it doesn't seem like anyone is manning this game? Does that make sense? Like, nobody's
Right.
moderating this game.
Yes. True.
So like what does it mean? So what does it mean if something is like in the rules or outside of the rules?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so like the Democrats' inaction over the last 8, 12 years in a lot of ways, right? Coupled with the kente cloth and the kneeling, just right? Like it's fishy.
It really is. I fully agree. The Democrats are more and more right leaning.
And that's the other thing.
Republicans, yeah.
Yes, and that's the other thing. It's like globally American right, is pretty far right, and
Mm,
right in the way of like the far right party in Germany is right, like just straight
yeah.
Nazism,
Yeah.
which is making a comeback.
Hmm.
And also, why is it
Yeah.
that the American left is also on the center side of right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I don't know if I have like I think the answer to this is like something about history and probably about something about enslavement, but it's just like it's fishy, right? Like I don't believe that we can have two parties that are like fundamentally separate from each other, right? When they are seeming to work in cahoots in all of these ways.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that. And I think it's because I think part of it, goes back to what we said earlier in the discussion. It's like when you think about what the core is in terms of what's valued,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, on both sides, it still isn't doing what's in the best interest of the people.
The
So it's going
people.
to continue to become
Yeah. Okay.
more, you know what I mean, conflated.
Yeah. Woo,
And
yeah,
yeah,
that was a word and a half. Yeah, it's like for both parties. Wow, yeah, for
right?
both parties, the bottom line is always money. It's never really about people. And Democrats like to say it's people, but it's really money, right? Because when
Yeah,
you're like, here's a policy that's actually like codifying Roe v. Wade, that's just a
yeah,
choice for people, and they didn't
exactly.
do it, right? And Biden got sworn in with the House and the Senate.
Mm,
I think at least we had one of them. There were so many times that we could have codified Roe v. Wade and we didn't.
that's right. Yep.
Right. And it's like there are so many ways in which our political system wants to keep us
Hmm.
destabilized,
Yeah.
right? And keep us without.
Yeah. So I agree. And the system has never worked for marginalized groups. So
No.
yeah. So we've just consistently been given breadcrumbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And fighting for our rights from the very beginning, whether they're women's rights, Black Lives Matter, or Black folks' rights, police brutality, poverty, education. Like
Yeah.
we've been fighting forever, and we will continue to fight because
Right.
it's not designed to ever give us what we want
Right.
and what we need to
Right.
thrive. That's just not the way it
And
works.
I had
So,
a
mhm,
yeah, I had a supervisor, a friend, somebody was like, I can only hope that the revolution comes seconds before climate change, before climate disaster.
yeah,
And I say this only to get back to like, does it have to fall? Like, I think the answer is yes.
yeah, it
And
has to. Yeah,
and I would really love if I would really love it if we could live in a world where we could just like revise things to be equitable, and revise things so that like your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your medical history doesn't come into play for any of these decisions, but like the way it is, it's literally written into the bylaws.
it
And
is.
like none of this is going to continue. Like we we can't be free until these systems are broken because these systems are what is keeping us in.
That's right. The systems are not broken. They are doing exactly what they were designed to.
They're doing exactly what they were designed to.
So,
Especially, yeah, go
mhm.
ahead.
No, go ahead. Say
Oh, I
your.
was gonna say like especially since they were designed by a bunch of white dudes who were
Mhm.
landowners who didn't really think that anybody else was people who didn't need
Yeah,
rights. And
yeah.
it's easier to govern for a monolith than it is for a mass cultural group of
Hmm.
people who you are not trying to enslave half of them.
That's right. So as we wrap up the conversation, I think a good last thought is, how do you define making progress? And do you
Oh
think
shit.
we truly made progress?
I think progress. Oh shit. I think that progress feels like a double-edged sword in some
Yeah.
ways, right?
Yeah.
Because in some ways, like we've made progress because like
Yeah.
you and me can vote, right? And like we can be unmarried women and
Yeah.
it's okay that and we can have bank accounts and we can own things and that's great.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
and on the other hand, um progress is not what am I trying to say? Like on one hand, we've gotten places. On the other hand, we haven't gotten far enough. And I think the longer we feel like we've gotten anywhere, the longer
Yeah.
we won't go anywhere.
Ugh, that, right? Because that keeps us stagnant. It's like, I don't know if you've heard
Complacent.
of the text Good to Great, or the author who wrote the book Good to Great, but yeah, it's like he says that great is the biggest threat to, I'm sorry, good is the biggest threat to great. Because when you believe that it's good enough, right?
You
And
start
that's
working
the
for it.
bar, you're not going to push for great.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. And I think that's what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is exactly what I'm saying. And I also just feel like there's nothing about our society right now that is good enough.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
and if anything, the pandemic showed us how much of it is deeply and utterly broken.
Right. It was exposed in ways that
So
people needed to see, even though if you've been, researching and you've been studying to understand truly and like knowing history, it would not be a surprise.
yeah. So what about you? How do you define progress? How do you define where we are?
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that for me, it really does depend on what you consider progress.
Progress.
Because I would say no, in the sense that for me, what progress is an awareness that we have collectively of why, like, what liberation means, right? How it works, and why it's can't even be conceived of without everyone being a part of it.
Yes. This is a group project.
Yeah. So in that sense, no, because I don't believe that even those of us who are the most marginalized understand that.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think, go
mhm.
ahead. Ooh, this is good, Ina. Go
But
ahead.
but as you said, right, like there are certain things that have happened in our lifetimes, and even, you know, before, historically, that have shown that doors have been opened, but unfortunately they lead to the same path, right, that is in the opposite direction of liberation.
Yeah.
It's like they're going to
They
continue to
get
let
co-opted.
certain, you know, right things trickle through to give the illusion that there's progress, right?
Right. Yes, and it's like the things that get trickled through are the things that can be co-opted.
That, and they continue to actually uphold the same problematic systems. So in that sense, there has not been progress. But are we able to live in a way that our ancestors would have seen as a privilege? Absolutely. Right? I mean, our ancestors were brought over here
In
enslaved,
chains.
chained, and that's the worst crime you can commit on another human, right? Is to subjugate them and limit their access to freedom. So, yes, that goes without saying. We've done that. But
Right.
how I define progress,
Right.
you know,
And I think
we have so far to go
there's
to
so far to
just
go.
reach the first tier of understanding that,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, there's that liberation. And not because in every generation there have been whistleblowers, there have been people who would, you know, would not uphold the status quo. Like, I'm talking about the collective. We're just
Right.
not there.
So this is something I just wrote down, and it feels pretty true, but like, and this also thinks about what we were talking about last time, or like earlier about white men, right? About American individualism is a threat to collective action and collective
That's right.
progress,
Yeah.
right? Because as long as we all continue to think of ourselves as individuals, we miss the point that we live in a society that we're all dependent on each other, and
Yeah.
that like being a human is not an individual experience. It is a collective experience. It is a
That's right.
group project. We were all in a group project. And the more that we act like we're solo actors, the worse grade we're going to get on this group project,
Mm, that's
you
so
know?
true.
And
That's
I
so
also think that we can't mistake, right? Like a lot of our ancestors came over in chains, right? And we individually, you and me, are not chained. And that's great. And
yes.
we have cousins, we have brothers, we have
Oh,
family members, we have ilk who are literally creating prison labor, right?
they're
And
still enslaved.
like making and they're literally in chains. I read an article today about a woman who was in prison for 28 years
Yeah.
on a line,
Yeah.
right? Like making railroad tracks and shit,
Yeah.
right? Like actual slave labor
That's what it
in
is.
Arkansas and Louisiana and Mississippi and
Yeah.
all of these places where
Yep.
chattel slavery got its hold. So don't tell me that it's different. It's just
It's the
more of
same
us
thing
got
under a
access to
different
the
name.
heart of the empire.
That's right. That's right.
And like, I don't know if that's freedom.
It's not. It's the illusion. It's the illusion. And it's just like you said. As long as we keep thinking that we've made progress, we won't.
Right,
Because we got to really truly know what the North Star, what the goal is.
right.
And it's not access to more and more of
It's not
oppressive systems.
consumerism.
Yeah. It's not access to oppressive systems.
Nope,
No,
sure is
it's
not.
dismantling the systems. And
Yeah,
I don't see the progress towards that.
yeah.
So so yeah, this was a good conversation.
Hell yeah.
I'm glad we finally got it out.
Yep, same.
There was so much to
It's just
say.
been rattling around in my head.
Yeah, so much to
Yeah.
say. Um,
Um, so our last question was, what's our role within the collective and like
mhm.
where we're going from here? So what do you think?
Oh yeah,
And I feel like we've been talking about this a lot, but this is like a great way to like bring it back, right?
absolutely. Well, I'll say for myself individually, I think that where I want to go from here is to really build community. And I feel like that in some ways is becoming like a buzzword or whatever, but um in the sense that it doesn't have to be made up only of people who think the way I think, look
Yeah.
like me, and feel the way I feel.
You don't have to like everybody you're in community with, you know?
Right. Like, I truly want to make space for conflict. I want to make space for the men who voted for Trump because I want to understand why you voted for Trump. I just
Yeah.
think we're more alike than we are different
Yeah.
than we know. And
Yeah.
that's just not like something that politicians say. I believe it's the truth.
Yeah.
But I think that we're all trying to grapple with what it means to exist in this really disconnected society. And if we can build more community amongst each other and embrace different perspectives, for me, that's the key.
Yeah.
I think we do a lot of shunning. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like you got to have strong boundaries. You can't just have people, you know what I mean, pulling you down and draining you and who are not willing to challenge themselves and to, be open to other perspectives. But I think as we continue to exist in our silos with people who just agree with us 100%, like we can't push against, right, these systems. And I don't think it starts outside of us. I think it starts with ourselves. And
Yeah.
so for me, I want to build community, but I want to be open to other and in a way that allows for that learning to happen, right? And that's hard. That's so much easier said than done.
Yeah.
But I do feel
Yeah.
like that's what I'm being called to do. Like that's the next step for me.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, showing up,
Um,
and I think that looks like showing up more in spaces with people who are talking about things that I just think is wild in ways that I think are like ridiculous. And just pushing about, what I mean, just showing up authentically and saying what I feel, regardless of the
mhm.
response or the pushback or whatever, you
Yeah.
know.
When you go into those spaces, remember to take backup. And when I say backup, I mean me.
Yeah. Let's do it. It's necessary. It's necessary.
um, it's necessary. Yeah, I really love that. Of like, I hear you talking about like confirmation bias a lot and like trying to
Yeah.
really reject it, and also trying to bring in people who agree about like who disagree with you, and also trying to come to like a mutual kind of understanding about those.
Yeah. Because I don't think
Yeah.
we can ever like bridge these gaps if we continue to just separate ourselves 100% of the time. Like
Yeah.
I may not like what you're talking about, but I think that there's something to be gained from at least opening up the conversation.
Yeah.
You just never know, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah. Learning is
with
so important.
boundaries, with boundaries.
Of course, with boundaries. Never without boundaries. Never
Right,
without
right.
boundaries. Um,
What
I
about
think
you?
this is great. I think for me, it is a big community piece. I think one of the things that I've been reflecting on a lot is that I was not necessarily raised as community minded. And I was like
Same.
really raised like individually, right? And I
Same.
think a part of that is being an only child, and like a part of that is like
Mm,
my parents really hating everybody.
same.
And so like it was like a very much like no one is for you but us kind of
That's
thing,
right.
when like that isn't really true, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
lots of other people can be for you. You just have to like find
Mm-hmm.
your people.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, a lot of that is like reaching out, finding more
Mm,
community, and also
yeah.
like not um and like also I mean community in like a super like also a very physical way, right? Like of like going to a place. There are
Yeah.
lots of similar like there are, when I say similar people, I mean like the same people show up in those spaces,
Yeah.
right? And it's like we get to know each other. We're talking about things. We're sharing ideas. We're sharing
Yeah.
right resources,
Mm,
strategies, like those kinds of things. And I think that's the other thing. Like I want to be more. I want to like use my resources better.
same. Good point.
You know,
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing that I feel like I've been called to do is like use my
Yeah.
resources better. And like and I think also like volunteering and like doing and like
Mm-hmm.
little shit like that, right? Like just like
Mutual aid and all that.
mutual
Yes.
aid. Yeah, mutual
Yeah.
aid, and like I think I definitely contribute to mutual aid when it's like, you know, my community,
Yeah.
right? As like in the smaller sense, but not
Yeah.
necessarily on the larger sense. And I want to get out of that.
Same here. You brought up some good points that I've not been thinking about, um, or didn't recall to share in this episode, but I've been thinking about those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thanks for
Yeah.
thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
Yeah, I think I would also like to take this moment to invite any of our podcast listeners. If you are a man,
Hmm.
if you voted for Trump, if you feel like you have legitimate reasons for doing so, please call us. We want to
Yeah,
talk to you.
we
Like
should.
we legitimately we don't know what it is to be you. Please come
Yeah,
tell us about it.
it would be good. It would be good to open up that
Um,
dialogue.
yeah, like I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it. However, just know if you're a little misogynist, we're gonna call you out on it. So
Gotta
just
call
check
you
your
in
shit.
and call you
Yeah,
out.
just check your notes before you come in. That's all. That's
Mhm.
all. That's all. That's all.
Yes, true. Lean into the discomfort as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. After this whole conversation on our policies, on our politics, on Trump era part two, here's my food for thought. If you are a man, please talk to your brethren. Where are they? Are they okay? And when I say are they okay, are they lonely? Do they need a hug? Right? Are they feeling alienated? Why? Talk to your brothers, please. If you are not a man, think about collective action. Think about collective aid. Think about how we're not necessarily the individuals that our country has groomed us to be. This is the group project. We are together. What are other ways that we can all show each other that we're in this together?